Hey everybody, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about a subject that I've not seen much information on condensed together, and that is adding a multipad to your kit, or just choosing a multipad in general. I'll need to put an asterisk at the beginning of this and say, this is my opinion. This is my experience, my opinion. But it really comes down to what is right for what are you trying to do musically. Let me give you some context. I started using multipads in the 80s. I have owned in total a number of different ones. I'll go through them quickly. I've owned the original Octapad. I now own the Octapad SPD-30. Sitting right here, still love this. Bought this in 2010, I believe, 2011. I have owned every iteration of the Roland sampling pad. I've owned the original SPD-S. I've owned the SPD-SX twice. I'll explain later. And I own the SX Pro. I still own my eDrum 3P. Love it. I have owned 3 different versions of the Korg Wavedrum. Really cool, really unique. I'll go over that in a bit. And I also owned for a short period the Korg MPS-10. And I've tried out and I've researched things like the Alesis Strike multipad, the Yamaha. I've owned a bunch and I've researched a bunch. So hopefully what you get from this video is sort of, one concise overview, if you will, of the variances of, the variations of all of the different pads. So let's talk about, I'm going to break this up into segments. So I gave you a little bit of my history with multipads, and then I'll give you sort of the overview of each. One thing to note, all multipads have pros and cons. And if you're not sure, kind of rule of thumb of what I do with any gear, especially with electronic gear, is I actually take the time to write out my own pros and cons list. What's so great about this and what might be the negatives? And even before I buy it, as well as before I sell it, what do I like about it? What do I not like about it? And does it serve my purpose musically or not? So highly recommend thinking about writing out your own pros and cons list. The key thing to decide before you buy any multipad is a couple of things. What are you trying to do? What is it that you want to get from this thing? Because sometimes, you see like an SPD-SX or an SX Pro and you just say, this is fantastic. I can do blah, blah, blah. I can do all of this stuff with it. You can, but you can also do many of those things with some of the other pads. What's your budget? What are you trying to do musically? How much time do you want to invest in it? What's the learning curve of this thing? What's the playability of this thing? Can I use it as a standalone? Do I want to use it as a standalone? Am I augmenting an acoustic kit? Am I putting it with my electronic kit? Do I want to use it as its own standalone mini drum set? What are you trying to do? That is the first question that only you can answer. And then, are you willing, if you buy a sample pad, are you willing to go and find all of the samples for it, load it, and then manipulate those samples inside of it? There's a ton of time that it takes to work with a sampler. Are you going to commit to it, or are you looking for something like the Alesis Strike multipad that has so many sounds already built into it, as does the Korg MPS-10? I'll cover these later on. Do you need loops? Do you need tracks? Do you just need one-shots? So that's a key decider or key decision fact on which pad that you want to buy and why you want to buy it. Do you want to expressively play it? In other words, dynamically play it like an instrument, or you just want to fire off one-shots, loops, samples, etc.? You got to think about that in advance before you shell out all of that money for it. And as I said, do you want to use it as a center of a mini standalone kit? So many of these pads have auxiliary inputs in the back. You can add a kick pedal, you can add a hi-hat pedal or not. That's a key decider. And you have to decide, do I want to add a hi-hat pedal to this thing? Do I want to use it? Am I ever going to use it as a standalone, drum kit where I want to be able to play it with my hands and my feet at the same time? So let's start with samplers. My history, I had about 20 years of samplers. I recently sold my SPD-SX Pro, and I'll talk about that in a second. I started with the SPD-S, and I thought it was cool, and it was fun, and it was unusual, and it had all these sounds in it. Then I quickly realized how much work it takes to go find samples, load them. At that point, you had to turn them into, I think, 16-bit. Same thing with the SX. You had to convert the files into 16-bit to load them. And then when you load them, sometimes they don't fire immediately, so you have to get in the machine and you have to cut them. Or if you're dealing with loops, you're dealing with timing and tempo, etc. So it was a lot of work. I sold the S off. A little while later, the SX came out. I bought that. A lot of fun. Had fun with it, realized within a few months I wasn't using it that much. I sold it. Then I started to work with hybrid drumming, and I was using if you look back at some of my older videos, I used a lot of multi-pads on the kit. And the sampler then became an important tool. I then started to really dig deep into collecting samples. I got thousands of one-shots, loops, keyboards, guitars, all kinds of things that I put into it, and I was having a blast with it, really loved it. So when the Pro came out, I immediately sold off my SX and moved up to the Pro, and the Pro is a fabulous machine. It truly is a professional machine. Now keep in mind what I said about finding samples. One thing to think about, with the SPD-SX Pro, but it has, I think, 1,500 sounds in it. That's a lot of sounds. If you can take any one of those sounds with the extensive editing that the SX Pro does, and you can manipulate those samples in so many different ways. So even though, before you think about going to find a tambourine with a big, reverb behind it, just load up one of the countless tambourines that's inside of it and use your own FX inside of it, and you're there. But you can do the same thing with an Octapad. And that was, again, one of the reasons why I sold off my SX. And sampling is a ton of fun, but it's a lot of work. It's a real lot of work. So over time, very rarely turning my SX Pro on. Do I still want one? Yeah, kind of. But I realized very quickly that with all of the editing that I have inside of my Octapad and my eDrum, I can program so much of the sounds that I really want. And the other thing is the playability on these other pads. I think, to me, in my opinion, just my opinion, I think the playability is much better on an Octapad, and especially on a eDrum, the playing experience. And SPD-SX is really great, for loading in. It comes with a lot of samples, and you load in samples, and you can play it like a drum kit, etc. But if you really think about it, it's a sampler. So when you hit the pad and you hit it again, it cuts off the original sample and it refires that sample. That creates machine gunning when you're playing quickly. There are ways around it. You can use a couple different pads if you want to do hi-hats. You can layer with it because each pad has 2 layers. So depending upon how you set up those layers, you can sort of mask that machine gunning. As I said, you can put like a hi-hat on 2 different pads. So if you're doing fast patterns, you go between them. You can let one sample ring out when you're hitting the other one. You can use a second pad as an open hat. You can connect a FD9 hi-hat controller to it and play hi-hat that way. So a lot of things you can do with it. But to me, what I found is the playability of it, meaning playing it like an instrument, is not kind of really where I wanted it to be. So I sold it off. And I didn't use the SX Pro as much as I used to. And whenever I get to the point of not using gear and it's just sitting there, to me, I just sell it off. There's no reason for me to hold on to it. Again, I do my own pro con list. And if, the cons outweigh the pros, then I sell it off and somebody else can enjoy it. So there's the Elisa Strike Multipad. The thing to know about that is if you hit a pad and you're on a patch, let's say you're on kit number 2 and you hit a pad and you switch to kit number 3, that shuts off the strike that you did from pad 2. The SX Pro does not do that. The SX Pro allows you that if you play a loop, for instance, in kit number 2, and then you go to kit number 4, that loop continues playing until you turn it off. The Strike does not do that. There are other less expensive sample pads like the Sample Pad Pro. Again, so look at your budget, look at what you want to do, etc. The Korg MPS-10 I thought is a really cool machine because it has so many different features. It has 10 pads where most of the other pads have 8 or 9. It has drums, percussion, and loops. It comes with 200 kits, which is similar to the SX Pro. It has 3,000 samples in it. That's amazing. And then almost over 2,300 instruments. So you figure, great, I really don't have to probably go find things because this thing has it all contained. And then the CC control pads for real-time FX and device control up top are really cool. Plus the internal looper it says a lot. But I got it and I was extremely disappointed in the playability of it. I just could not figure out and program, the sensitivity of it, the threshold and sensitivity. So if you hit it lightly, I was getting nothing, no matter what I did. Lowering the threshold, raising the sensitivity, looking at every control I could try to figure out. I even reached out to Korg product control and wondering, did I buy a defective one? But just be wary that if you buy the MPS-10 and you want to play it with a lot of dynamics, it doesn't react. I think maybe they'll do a firmware at some point, and if and when they do, I'll probably revisit it. That's samplers. That's just kind of at a high level. So let's jump over. So I still have my Octapad. It has 8 touch-sensitive pads, very high playability. Some of the sounds are dated, but they're still very good, very rich. Layering, they have 2 sound layers on each pad. So if you're doing a djembe, you can do the bass note and then you can put the slap on the same exact pad. And you can play it dynamically, so when you hit harder, as you would with a slap, the slap sound comes out. You can mix that, you can make it so that it comes in gradual, just like the same type of mixing that you can do with the SX Pro. The Octapad has a lot of that built in. It has a phrase looper, so you can literally build loops on the fly with it. You can store, I think it has 50 that you can store inside of it. To me, it has very rich sound, samples, drums, percussion. There's some keyboards, there's special effects, etc. There are 4 dual zone inputs in the back, plus a hi-hat controller. Very easy to create a mini drum set from it or with it. And then there is an SPD-20 Pro. It was released in around 2020, if I believe. I think that's primarily meant to be sold outside of the U.S., although you can buy it in the U.S. So just be aware of that's out there and something to consider. But to me, the Octapad, it's so easy to edit and to get inside of it, so easy to learn, and it just fulfills so many different things that I want from a multi-pad. And I can't stress this enough. The playability of it is fantastic. It really becomes its own instrument. Other things to consider, the Yamaha DTX Multi. I looked at that extensively. I played around with it in a store, and it's pretty cool, but To me, I'm a bit more of a Roland guy. The Yamaha at this point is a little bit dated. I think it came out in the mid 2000s, like 2006 or 7. There are edits you can do with it, I believe, through an iPad, etc. So Yamaha is very good. I'm not knocking it at all. I'm just saying there was no need for me to buy it. So another thing to consider with some of these pads is their MIDI capability, their USB connection to a PC capability. So for instance, I kept my Octapad and my eDrum because they both have MIDI in and out. And there have been times I MIDI them together. That creates a whole new world of exploration, sound exploration. You can also use these devices hooked up as a USB controller. So you can do it with the SX, SPD-SX, and you can do it with the Octapad. I don't think the Nord is USB. I forget off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure no. But check to find out with your device. So I can take my Octapad and I can connect it into my laptop. So I can make my Octapad a MIDI controller. So all of the sounds and loops that are inside of my DAW, I can easily fire from my Octapad. You can do the same thing with your SX Pro. I've done it with the SX Pro. I don't think I've done it with my Octapad yet, but you can do it. And then if you have something to consider, if you have a electronic kit, many newer kits allow you to import samples. So primarily one-shots, although a couple modules out there do let you do round-robin samples. But if you can import samples, if you have an eKit, and let's say you have 14 inputs or whatever, and you're only using 10 of them, you can add a bar trigger like a Roland BT1. You could add a small round rubber pad. You can load samples into this and use that as your sample. So before you start thinking, I have electronic kit and I have to go buy a multi-pad, if you're only firing off one or two things, especially with a kit like this, I can put a tambourine on a rim, so I don't even need another pad. I can just assign a hand clap to this rim or tambourine to this rim. I can make a cymbal, anything I want. So if you have an electronic kit, what I'm saying is think outside of the box. Don't have to go out and buy something unless you want to leave your kit as is and play around with multi-pads. Let's switch gears. If you are a hand percussionist, there's the Roland Handsonic. I looked at that extensively. The thing is that it's not meant to be played with sticks. And I know you probably can play it with sticks. It's not meant to be played with sticks. It's meant to be played with your hands, and that's why it's called Handsonic. Really cool device. A lot of these pads, by the way, you can play with your hands. It's just that they're meant to be played with sticks. Staying with hand percussion, I owned 3 different Wavedrums. Not the original, going way back to the 90s like Danny Carey uses. I never had one of those. But when Korg reintroduced it, the ones with the silver metal frame, I bought that. I sold it. I think I bought the Oriental and I sold that. And then I bought the Wavedrum Global Edition and had that for quite a while, and then sold that off. I sold it each time because it's a cool device, but it's very different, very unique. There's nothing else like it, which is the pro side of it. The con side is it's really loud. It has a real drum head. It has, the outer edge of it is metal. So when you hit it, especially if you're playing an electronic kit and you hit this thing, it's like clank, boom, whack. It's really loud. The expressiveness on it is just amazing. So the way you can do things with your hand and sticks and mallets and brushes, there's nothing else like it. It is a super fun device to play with. But truth told, a lot of weird sounds in it. So, if you can truly get, ethnic type of true percussion sounds, and nothing else comes close to being as real as that other than the real thing. The expressiveness that you can play with it is just unbelievable. Go watch all the videos. But by and large, most of the sounds inside of it are weird. which is, if you're going for that odd sound, if you're making soundtracks, there's no other device. I think Russ Miller did a video on it, and he says that's what he uses it for. And then last thing I'm going to go over, which is probably, is one of the coolest devices I've ever owned, and I still do own it, the eDrum 3P. Unlike anything else, it is not a sampler. It's not sample-based. It's a drum synthesizer. There's nothing else that sounds like it. It just has this great mix of analog and digital inside of it. And it's super easy to get in and get under the hood. The Nord layout on it, once you learn it, and it doesn't take long at all to learn it. So it does have these basic waveforms. So if you want to kick, it has a certain number of kicks and a certain number of snares and a certain number of toms. But they're not samples. They're sort of already pre-designed setups, if you will, that sound like a snare, a tight snare, a loose snare. But the thing about the Nord, the playability of it is just unbelievable. It's such a fun device to play. It can be a drum set. It can be very esoteric. So when I sold off my Wavedrum, the Nord scratches that point of weirdness. So I can get really fat, cool sounds on it, like an 808, it's a standard, but I can get these sounds that you can't get from anywhere else. You can say, okay, this sort of sounds like tuned bells, because it has, tuned percussion in it, if you will. You can do anything with it. So you can make it dry, you can make it, very ambient. You can delays, all kinds of effects that are built into it. Really cool device, very different. You don't see a lot of them out there, and the people that use them tend to be more on the creative, side of electronics, if you will, meaning they're not just playing your standard thing. They're kind of leaning towards this artsy, if you will, type of sound. So if you go back through many of my older videos, you'll see a lot of these pads in use. As I said at the top, I currently only have the Octapad and the eDrum. Currently fulfill everything I want to do. One last thing to think about with all of this too is, at one point I owned a Line 6 HX effects, and that's a really cool device. So what I did was, I still have a looper pedal hooked up to both of these pads, so I can create loops on the fly and then play along with it. That's a lot of fun. The HX effects took it to another level, because it has so many effects in it. You could take an Octapad sound, let's say something pretty that has like a marimba type of, across the pads, and then put it through the HX effects, and all of a sudden it sounds like this fuzz guitar, heavy metal thing. Like, whoa, where'd that come from? So, again, think outside the box. Think about sound sculpting. Think about creating something that's new and unique, and not just another me too. Anyway, I hope all of this helps. As always, if you have any questions on any of this stuff, just hit me up in the comments below. Thanks for watching.